So working in layers, one of the things that is a good thing to keep in mind is how the layers are going to interact with each other. Some things can be hidden behind layers. Some things can be sort of this feeling of peeking through. In all art forms, artists use layers. I have, if you're a photographer, you think about composition, you might think about depth, and that is creating layers. If you're painting, painters work in layers, creating an underpainting and then layering on top. Watercolor paint, same thing. So I love to talk about layers in the technical sense, but then also in the, using layers to create meaning in your work. So thinking about, things that are opaque completely, like you cannot see through them, no light will pass through, cutting into that and maybe making some way to see through it. A lot of altered books use that technique. Things that are transparent or translucent. One of my favorite materials is vellum. You can get that at Michael's in the drawing materials, like architectural vellum, or animators use vellum, back when animation was done, well, still, I'm sure is done by hand, many animators. But even if you're working in Procreate, or if you're working in another drawing program, a digital drawing program, you can work in layers and you can create transparency in Photoshop also, creating windows or openings. So this is a page that I made in it's actually in a research workbook that I did for a class, where we took some of our writing, and then actually it wasn't even an assignment. We were just looking at like a particular assignment to use layering, but we did these pieces of writing where we wrote letters to ourselves about our education. And so I took that and I kind of translated it into some pages in my research workbook where I used vellum. There's like sheets of vellum here layered on top, or, just trying different things. Tracing paper works well for that. I took the writing, typed it out, and then cut it into strips, sort of like refrigerator poetry. So I'm going to show you some other materials that you can use. Let me switch my share. Okay, so here's my note to record. So the inner workings, right? So some materials that you can use just, to give you ideas are, so they make these quick laminating sheets that are adhesive. You don't need a laminator. They are sticky sheets and a box lasts forever. And you just peel, and I'll show you some ways that I have used these in the past. Oh, it's just one. And then, you can keep the pieces, you can use them different ways. So that's one. So these just staples. Another thing that I don't know how easy it is to find anymore are transparency film, but this is for a printer. So you could put this through your printer. And I have to show you an example where I've done that. Again, box might last forever. I don't even know when I bought these. I don't think there's any sort of date on there. But they're just printable transparencies. And it's hard to see on the camera, but these are really fun to draw on using permanent marker. So we'll talk about that. The other thing is, most people have these in their house, these clear sheets that you put papers in. So they're a little thinner than these two items, but work great. I just show you under some I ground. had to pause for a second there. Plastic bags. They're great for this. You can cut them up. You can even put things in them and then glue that as a pouch to the page. This happens to have a place to write on it. And then things like this, everything comes in a plastic package. So it's actually earth friendly too. This one's a little crinkly compared to some of the others, but even this sort of plastic is great. So these are all just clear, mainly transparent options. I talked a little bit about vellum, and I showed you an example of vellum in the slides. Some other ways to use that while I have this screen share on. So this is not vellum, this is printable transparency. So this I printed a photo on, and then it's just taped on here with clear tape. So also Scotch tape is a great option for a transparent or translucent. You can layer it on top of itself, so that you can do things like tape, like these photographs are taped down, and then they're taped down with clear tape so I could write on top of it. So that's what the transparency looks like. In terms of lamination, so if you have a laminator that you can actually, like a heat laminator, there's different weights of film for that. So these are lamination pouches, and this is the thinnest ones my laminator will take. You could use these without heating them up, and they are kind of more of a translucent look. You look, they're like when you put it down, but when it's held up, it's not completely clear. But if you have a laminator, this comes in heavier too. There's 5 and 7. I've never used 7, but only because 5 is thick enough. So, but some fun things that you can do with your laminator if you do have one, and then you can put them in your sketchbook. Move this out of the way, starting a pile of things. Is this is a project that I did in a class where they had to create little flower compositions. So these are actual flowers that went through the heat laminator, flowers and clovers. And it changes the color of them basically instantly. But these have been around for a while. I did some experiments where I put crayon in there to see if it would melt well. It would really need to be thicker, and maybe even like a oil pastel or like a deeper wax crayon might work, or like even just shaving pieces of the crayon off, because it melts. So it's in between. This is a 5 ml, by the way. It's a little heavier. I think this is a 3. It's probably very hard to tell on the camera. You can tell a little bit. So this is an entire plant that I put through the laminator. Just grab something white to put behind it so you can really see it. And then I have a even larger one. So it's just, trying different things. These are just some leaves and crayon. Again, just an experiment to try to see what the crayon would do. I wanted it to be darker, so it wasn't my favorite, but this just on its own is really pretty. And you could use this in a sketchbook if you want to preserve, like I was specifically thinking about Tina's garden, or, you want to preserve something. If you can't be too thick because you are going to roll it through your laminator. But as long as it's not, thinking about the fact that it can take up to 7 millimeters, 7 millimeters. It seems like the wrong name. Well, anyway, you want to not make it any thicker really than your lamination can handle, but the lamination also is supposed to have things in it. So a laminator is a great way to layer. And if you are a person who loves that idea, they're not that expensive, just for like a at-home heat laminator. Um, and then the lamination comes in boxes of 100, lasts forever, because there's so much of it and you can do so much with it, especially if you're not working very large. I have some projects in the works that use this technique. So there's that. And then I did start a couple of different pages this week just to give you some ideas. So this, thinking about pattern and repetition, and then I took one of the laminated flowers that I had made and I glued it on top. So I glued this with a glue stick and it dried clear. So that kind of pinkish hue that you see is a little bit of the glue stick, but mostly it's from this flower because it was a red flower. And then I drew the background pattern with pencil. And I was thinking about, kind of that like record keeping, and what kind of symbols I could create with to start to create my own visual language the way that we talked about last time. And then this is another layered. So this kind of, I think, still in the works. But what I did was I took I started with some pencil, and then I took the peel and stick lamination and just cut up a little piece of fabric. It actually is was a little sample fabric that I had in my purse because I was still on vacation. That I got at IKEA for a couch sample. And then I just cut it up and stuck it to the back of this clear transparent plastic. And then I drew on top of it with an ink pen, and then took some more of that and almost used it as tape to pull some of it off. And it's dry now, so it comes off a little bit, but I do want to show you one way to seal some of these things. And this is still in the works for sure. And I started another one that had used some of that. I had 2 samples and the clear transparency. So I cut some little fringy pieces, and these are just stuck almost. I used the transparency almost like tape. And then I plan on filling in this page. For me, really, this and this one are experiments in materials just to see how they behave. This I was thinking more conceptually. I'm thinking about like, creating that language. So those are just a couple of the layered ideas. And then in this book, if you are a person who uses paint, paint is lovely for layering, and also paint collage. I will show you a few more slides that use examples like this, but this is an altered book. So let me see if I can zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Let me just pause the recording for a second. Okay, so this is you can see the whole book. It's not a small book. It's I don't know, what is this, about 12 by 16? No, 12 by 8, maybe. It's not small. Actually, piece of paper. No, it's 8.5 by 11. So it's about the size of a piece of paper. And I chose this book because I think I showed this to you before. It was a book that was retired from the library. It's called Children's Play Spaces, and it's a book about playgrounds. So this is not its original front cover. I collaged this on here. And then I just, over the years have done different things in it. And I continue to go back to it to do different things. So I started to do some blackout poetry on that page. I folded the pages in and made these like a flap book. And oftentimes when I do things, they're for examples for teaching. So I teach I'll teach bookmaking techniques. And so I try to put them into the thing that I'm working on. So this is sort of like a hodgepodge of things, and it's all collaged. So these flaps open, and then I also created another flap that opens. There's some paint on the page. There's a thinking about bicycles. And I have another something else to show you that I would like. That's layering, focusing on bicycles. So then I added some Polaroid photos that I had taken in, I think I took these in Savannah, Georgia, of this power station, and then did a little bit of cutout from the pages. Here's a cutout, and then I drew this clock in there. This actually is the collage that was in the book, and then I added this little piece. Sometimes it's hard to tell what was added. So then you can use things like color pencil on top of images. What I was hoping to show you is this page that uses paint. So the image in the background, the black and white image of the kids on these things, like these really awesome pear-shaped playgrounds, is was the original picture. And then I drew on top this like kind of like seedling growing. I don't know if you can see it. There's the seed and it's like busting out. But this white that you see is paint, white paint. And the nice thing is, if you water it down, it'll give you a sense of transparency. More Polaroids. I showed you that page already. And here's another painted page with a little bit more paint. So you can apply your paint and then scratch into it so you can see through it. These are all just kind of stuff. Because I did this quite a while ago, so sometimes I find so there's that. And then going back to the transparency film and drawing on it. So what you can do is you can take that transparency film and you can layer it on top of images and use a Sharpie to trace those images. So I did that here. And then I will add this somehow. Maybe, by cutting it out and then using it as another flat. Here's another image from a different bicycle picture. So I might add those in to a page. And then there's some other drawings on there. Sharpies work really well on the transparency film. So, for instance, you can lay them down over almost anything and then using a Sharpie. And I've done this with a lot of bookmaking teaching bookmaking, because you can get a pretty nice effect. It's the sort of like those flat books that you might have had as a kid where you could flip the parts of the body. And then I have like a little shadow of the people. I can put that in here. So this is more creating these compositions, creating maybe just experimenting with materials, and then thinking about ways that you can make meaning from your materials. So one of the things I love to teach about is the fact that materials do have meaning, and it's kind of embedded in there. So I'm going to continue with these slides. And so, just to reiterate, also any sort of thin paper that you might have, or like a notebook that has paper that's real thin in it. Sometimes like the cheaper the notebook, the thinner the paper. Might not be a notebook that you'd like to write in, but it might work well for something like this. The other thing you can think about are layering things like writing, shapes, painting and drawing, like I said, and collage. So I will show you a couple materials that are good for collage. And then I have these slides in here, and when I can, I will post the slides thinking about artist books. So if you have not explored that, it will be kind of a, once you start, you'll get it's fun to look at the ways that artists approach books, and you can use some of these techniques um, in your sketchbooks and in your journal creation. So an artist book is typically a work of art in itself. I have made a variety of books that I would love to show you. I'll have to make sure that I kind of gather them all together. One of my favorite, and I didn't, I discovered it when I had to make a catalog. The first one I made, I think, was I had to make a catalog for a show. And I spent more time on the catalog than I did thinking about the work that was in the show. And I was like, I love this medium. Um, and especially, now with libraries not, wavering in like the way that people feel they are important to society, which, I think it's crazy when they eliminate libraries and librarians, but I have a dear friend who's a librarian, a school librarian. She's awesome. But thinking about the book is like a special object. So many artists' books ask you to rethink the way that you read a book. I have some books that I show my students that they're children's books and they use cutouts to change the story. One of our favorite books that we would read to our son when he was little, but then also recently I was like, Henry, read this book. And he read it out loud. I loved it. I will show you that one too. I believe I have that here. So artists will incorporate different ways of using typography, paper making, printmaking, the way the book is constructed, graphic design, creative writing, digital media, all kinds of things. So this is one that I like to show my students where it's about layering. It uses layering. It's all in clear transparency. And there's a website where you can see more of the way that the artists use this. And uses text. And then I often will, I hear, as I showed you in the example, I'll often teach students to think about things in layers with bookmaking, creating flat books. They might not have any words at all. They're more about the visual or the experience of the book. So you could consider putting even things like Post-its in your sketchbook that you can then use as flaps to think about that like interactive piece. Little envelopes. You could use these techniques to create yourself like almost like little envelopes. There was a great book that came out, a series that came out a few years ago, and I had them, and I kind of wish I didn't get, like, I think I gave them away, but it was a story of two people who wrote letters to each other, and the letters were in the book. It was great to read. Another way to create layers is by cutting into paper or collaging. So this is a cut piece, just using an X-Acto knife. Remember, we talked about the X-Acto knife and the cutting mat that you can use. These little cutting mats. This is a tabletop one. The other thing is, if you are a person who owns a vinyl cutter, like a Cricut or a Silhouette vinyl cutter, you could think of using your vinyl cutting skills in new ways. I'm actually going to teach a class on that at the Banana Factory in September. I'm teaching a class in September and a class in November, and I think that's the one in September, and it's for adults on using Procreate to create your own designs for your vinyl cutter. And so I'll talk about that too, like creating fine art, art pieces or sketchbook pages using vinyl. So we talked about materials. I showed you a lot of different things. One last thing I want to show you is I'm going to share the camera again. Is this nifty stuff, which many of you have probably already heard of, Mod Podge. So these are just two small, ooh, focus camera. These are just two small bottles of it, which were only $1. And I believe I think they sell this at Dollar Tree occasionally. Sometimes they have things and then they don't. But it comes in more than just matte and lust and gloss. There's an outdoor version. There's some that come with glitter in them. So you can get lots of different ones. Even a little bottle like this, if you're just doing a little bit of collaging, will last you. So not just collage, it also is a sealer. So like this, which I had shown a few times, this book was hold on, it's like blurry. So I drew on the cover of this with pencil. This was a book that got passed between different artists. If you remember, there's a lot of different techniques in here. Like here's this artist made a pouch and put dried leaves in it. But I drew the picture in pencil on the cover and then collaged these little deer that came from the inside of the book. And I didn't want this to smear or get on anything. So I used this is actually a glossy finish to seal it. And sometimes you can use it kind of like paint. So I'll show you how it goes on real quick. And it's helpful if you do something like this and you don't want it to transfer to your next page. I'm just going to get this to focus. Stop for a second and try that again. It's not focusing. There we go. Okay, so this is the matte finish. I'm actually use the glossy finish, I think. Oh, it's kind of gooey. And remember when you use a collaging medium that the brush, as long as you wash it right away, you'll be fine. If you leave it on the brush, you might have to soak it to get it to be clean. But if you wash it right away, it should be okay. And you'll see, this is our teachers reuse everything. I was like, I need something to put my Mod Podge in. This is the cap to vitamins, a bottle that was empty. And you'll see that it goes on kind of white. It's probably a little harder to see on this page. I'm also going to force some of it underneath here just to stick this down. And I don't want to brush too much because it is picking up the pencil. But it dries completely clear and it'll seal this pencil down. And if I want to collage anything else on the page, I can. So once I get up to here, so you can see it's starting to pick up the pencil. So I'm going to go with that for right now. You just have to brush it less. Like, just kind of smear a layer on there, but don't keep going over it. And then you won't get the pencil smearing into it. The way to avoid that would be a spray, which they do make a pump spray of Mod Podge, but you could also use a clear acrylic spray. And then I'm just going to grab something to add to this. Okay, so I am going to, this was a card that I made with a block print. And I had it for a long time. I never used it. So I'm going to collage this little flower print onto this page. So I'm just using scissors. I could also use an X-Acto. And it's just paper. It's like a kind of a handmade thicker paper. So I want to I'm going to put it up here, I think. Actually, I'm going to pause for a second because I'm going to cut the center of this out so I can see through it. Okay, so here's a good chance to see the X-Acto in action. To take this circle out, I always cut kind of like an X in the middle. And then that way I only really have to cut the 4 corners. I don't feel like I have to cut all the way around, you know, like a big circle. Yeah, I think that will be better because I don't want to lose the fact that there's this pencil here. Okay. And so with the Mod Podge, you can to collage something down, put some of it down first, and then stick this thing on top, whatever it is that you're collaging, and then seal it down. Now this is a water-based ink, this print. So it is definitely bleeding, which I didn't think about. But again, I might just need to go with it. So I'm gonna brush the ink in. This print was made a while ago too. It's interesting how I'm gonna have to make this part of it. That's something to think about. If you're collaging a water-based material. All right, and then I'm going to brush this out because I have this ink now mixed with my Mod Podge, and I'm going to make it kind of part of the piece. And the wonderful thing is if I wanted to make a bigger piece like this, I can, now I kind of know what the materials will do, and I can, because I did it in my sketchbook. So that's another way to use your sketchbook is as a place to experiment for larger artworks, which, you know, a lot of artists do that. They plan in it, but then, you know, it's also important to try out your materials. So I actually really like the way that the ink blends, and there's kind of that like little highlight there. So I might cut out more from that card. I have a little bit left here, and add some more to the page. So what I have on here now is pencil, collage, print making, because it's a linoleum block print, and then I also have this actual flower that's laminated. So